Hey, this is Kieran, Coach's Corner Chats, and joining me is Lesle Gallimore. Leslie, where are you at and what are you up to?
Well, I'm here in Seattle, Washington, where I've been for 30 something years. And I am currently the general manager at Seattle Reign FC in the NWSL. And prior to that was the commissioner of the Girls Academy as a startup league back in 2020 during the pandemic. And prior to that, 26 awesome seasons at the University of Washington as the head coach. So I've just been chilling up here in the upper left corner for quite a bit now.
What tasks and roles and responsibilities does a general manager have for a professional team?
It depends on which club you're in. This was a unique position I took over back in the middle of 2023, in the middle of the season. And you're responsible for the roster, the first team staff, and basically operations on the soccer side. We were at the time when I took the job owned by OL, which is the Olympique Lyonnais group in France, but we were also for sale when I took the job. So the sale of the club was an interesting time. It took about 14 months for the club to sell. So during that time, everyone was working hard to just hold things together because we were basically a little bit under-resourced and we weren't able to really move forward with a lot based on the sale. So we just we did make it to the final that year, which was against all odds, which was great. But free agency, et cetera, it kind of handcuffed us a little bit. But we forged ahead and we're fortunate in June of this year to be bought by the Carlisle Group out of New York and the Seattle Sounders are the operating owners. So we're now two clubs under one enterprise, and it's been a fun 4 or 5 months now getting to know the new ownership group and forge our new chapter, which starts with the 2025 season. We're well on our way to working towards a better future for the club.
What's it been like to when you came in worrying about financials and all that kind of stuff to now see not only where Seattle is in terms of your setup, but the league in general and just the women's game?
The investment in women's sports and where it's going is truly phenomenal from someone who, has kind of seen the sport from the women's perspective, the women's game, sort of from the beginning here in the United States, back in the 70s and early 80s for collegiate soccer. It's phenomenal to see where the game has gone from a professional standpoint. And the third iteration of a pro league, a full professional league here in the United States. This one has clearly lasted longer. We had a little bit of a rebirth after the Yates report came out, and the valuation of the clubs has been skyrocketing. The expansion of the league has been outstanding, particularly on the West Coast. We're hoping for another West Coast team to add as the 16th team. I think Denver's in the mix with Cincinnati and I believe Cleveland. So we're crossing our fingers for Denver. Just another West Coast team would be outstanding. But it's to me, it's just a joy to be a part of. It's so great for our sport. It's so great to see. I would say how the U.S. league has fed off international leagues and how international leagues have fed off the U.S. League. It's really just a global, basically, phenomenon to watch how the game has just taken off. The level of pay, the level of the game itself, the level of investment, and the commitment from owners to do better by women and our sport, and to see it as its own entity and not just a mirror of the men's game or the little sister too, but to see it as its own investment. I think Michelle King puts it best. It's we don't want to be looked at as a charity. We're a serious business and something that is worthy of investment.
You mentioned soccer back in the 70s and 80s. When did you get into the game of soccer? Were you playing as a youth? Like, when did you start getting that love of the game?
Yeah, I started playing in about the 7th or 8th grade. It kind of took off from there for me. I was, one of 4 kids with a single mom. And, what I got to do as activities typically needed to be inexpensive. And soccer was one of the least expensive things to do, that and go to the beach, because I grew up in Southern California. So one was free and the other one was very low cost. My brothers didn't really play soccer. My little brother started after I did, but my older brothers did other sports. And I was the only girl in my family, so it wasn't really a choice of whether I was going to play sports or not. It was something we all did to stay active. And for me, it was, kind of a sisterhood, right off the bat, as it was really fun to socialize with other girls and be on a team and be a part of something with others. And I fell in love with it. And I, from middle school to high school, found that it was what I like to focus on. I did play other sports and do other things, but I really enjoyed soccer. I didn't think I was ever going to keep playing after high school. And then the opportunity to play in college came, and I was really lucky to end up at the University of California, Berkeley, on the front end of club soccer becoming varsity soccer, fighting for scholarships for women's sports in general all over the country. We were all doing that, and being able to watch that evolution and be a part of that sort of movement at that time was really cool. I remember graduating from Cal in 1986, and there were, I think, 17 to 20 something maybe Division I women's programs, and there's 333 now. So again, I think in the middle of always fighting for more, it's great to be able to reflect and look back where we started and how far we've come as a reflection. So so I stayed at Cal and I coached and went to law school for a year, but then decided that coaching and continuing to play was going to be my path. And it ended up being a great decision for me. I've enjoyed a long coaching career. I've been a coach educator, and now to be involved in the administrative side and the club side of professional women's sports is just a dream come true.
What was it during your time at Cal that kind of gave you that itch that maybe coaching is something that I could do?
We had a coach at Cal that we hired, and going into my second year, who was a gentleman that coached a lot of my teammates as youth in Southern California, and he was an attorney, and he was a guy who never played soccer, self-professed horrible athlete. Baseball was kind of his gig, and he was never great, but he loved sports and he loved the management of sports, and he was a true manager, and he was able to connect with our athletic director at Cal, and he volunteered his time, and he really taught us all how to stand up for ourselves and promote ourselves and be involved in the change that we wanted to see. It was very Berkeley-ish, if you must know. And so he with myself and along with a lot of my teammates, encouraged us all to lead and empowered us to lead from the field, from off the field. And so we all felt so invested in our own pathway. And I learned that at a really young age. And, his name was Bill Merrill, and he passed away in 1995. And I'll never, forget the influence he had over me and the rest of my career. Even after he was gone, I often thought about things that he would have done or things he would have said. And just the, sort of opportunity he gave me to be a part of this sport and how it blossomed for me probably would have never happened without him.
When you look back at your first experience coaching, how did you even make that happen? Did you do similar things to Bill and reach out to places? How did the opportunity to come out and coach?
I never intended to be a coach. It was, I was put into leadership positions quite frequently as a player. Bill used to confide in a group of us for advice on the soccer piece, again, empowering us to lead from the field and off the field. And when I graduated from Cal, and again, I was heading off to law school, I was an assistant coach there. I kept coaching and playing, and I was playing sort of in the national team pool. I was on the national B team. I played in a lot of sports festivals, and I played well into my 40s. And so the game was just always a part of what I was doing. And we didn't have a professional league, so it was up to us to continue to find ways to play. So it was kind of player coach, finding someone that would volunteer to coach our amateur teams, raising money. We all, raised money to try to make these trips to just continue our playing careers. And coaching kind of spawned out of that, I would say, just the necessity and, maybe somewhat of an inkling for it. I had a little bit of an ability, and then a group of my friends and I started, looking into coaching licensing. So we did our C license, our B license, our A license, It all just kind of, one thing led to another, and opportunities started to come. Being an assistant at Cal for, basically volunteering, you were never going to make a lot of money coaching, but it kept you attached to the sport, and it gave you the opportunity to learn by trial and error. And I was very, very fortunate growing up to be around a lot of great player coaches in Ziggy Schmidt and my club coach, Brian Boswell, a lot of the guys that came to play in the NASL in the 70s who stayed in the US to become coaches. Clive Charles out of Portland. I was around a lot of really great role models, to be honest, and male coaches and former players who always treated women as equals. They, the game was the game, whether you were a girl or a boy, a man or a woman, and they gave you opportunity. So I had a lot of people to look up to and to role model after, from how they behaved on the sidelines. And again, you learn to be yourself as a coach by picking and choosing what falls into your personality. I think trying to mimic anybody else and do exactly what they do is never going to make you a great coach, but picking and choosing the characteristics or the ways or the things on how they manage or how they teach the game is always going to be something that molds you as a coach. But I learned pretty early on that if I was just me and I would admit to what I didn't know and coach what I did know and learn from failing a lot, that it would keep me in the game a lot longer, and it would help me improve and learn and grow and become better at my craft. And then surrounding myself with other, people and that were on a similar pathway. Jan Smizik is a good friend. She was about a generation before me in the women's game, and she's someone who I looked up to. Even though she's about half my height, I looked up to her as someone who was on the front edge. She's one of the first women to get her A licenses. So I learned a ton watching her break down barriers and deal with sort of the misogyny that comes with being a woman in a man's field. And, I got really, really fortunate to have great people around me to learn from. And the opportunities came and I took them.
You mentioned the barriers of being a female in, at that time, kind of a male dominated sport in terms of coaching. What was that like? Was it power in numbers that you talked about, having a group that went through all of the coaching courses and having, Coach Music and some of these others? Is that what it was? It just kind of a collective movement as people just started getting more and more interest, and then here we are.
It was a little bit of a collective movement. You had your, as long as you had your one buddy with you, you felt like you could do it. And so, and then, the women won the 91 World Cup, and Amy Allman was the goalkeeper at the time. Amy Griffin ended up being an associate head coach with me at Washington for 24 of my 26 seasons. And now she coaches the deaf women's national team. She and I, along with Michelle Akers, who is a pretty popular name, they won the 91 World Cup. And then that gave them credibility, to be honest. They started gaining credibility, and I latched myself onto that group, and Shannon Higgins, Sorofsky. And I remember doing coaching courses with them, and we were, 4 women in a group of 36 men, and we could play. And so, Anson Dorrance was one of the instructors, Bobby Howe, Clive Charles, we did our B license with. Like, these guys knew that we could play soccer. So when you got into a coaching environment, if you leaned on your playing ability and then were wise enough to sort of pick up the nuances of how to teach the game, and have confidence in ourselves. And again, power in numbers, not that 4 of 36 is numbers, but it was more than you normally would get. And so I think having that support of each other, and again, of some of these great male coaches that I named that supported us, really made all the difference. And they would push us. They didn't treat us differently. They didn't pass us in the course because we were women and felt like they needed to. We had to earn everything that we got, but we had the confidence to do it because we felt supported in our pathway. And I know that not every woman experienced that. And there were times where, I floated through a good 10 years of my coaching career, never really experiencing sexism directly. I felt like I was earning opportunities and I was working really hard to be better. But then I think the 90s rolled around and the boom really happened. They added a ton of college teams. The need for coaches expanded on the women's side. A lot of women who were less experienced and hadn't really had the support that maybe a group of us had, were thrown into some pretty big jobs and opportunities and didn't succeed, and didn't have the confidence to hop back in once they failed or lost a job. So there was to me, the growth was really expanded so quickly. There was almost a whole generation of women coaches that was lost, in my opinion. Some that started coaching, failed, and never came back because of the experience that they had, and that was unfortunate. I think we, as a collective group, a lot of my colleagues and I, female and male, really started to mentor more, try to bring people along more, make sure that in coaching schools and becoming a coach educator, that the women who came through those schools felt supported and prepared to go and take a big job. I think we leaned on each other a ton, and I really do feel fortunate that 30, 35, going on 40 plus years in this game, that there is a really, really strong collective of women that have been in this game as long as I have, that have carried each other through. I mean, we've just locked elbows and pulled each other along, and for that I'll forever be grateful.
So you're an assistant coach at Cal. At what point does Leslie decide, you know what, I might want to venture out and try some other coaching opportunities?
I would never really thought of it that way. I was approached by a couple of schools after I'd been at Cal for 3 or 4 years, and I decided to stop going to law school after 1 year. So I was playing still. Like I said, I was like, "Ooh, this coaching thing, I can get paid for it a little bit, and keep playing." And again, because they weren't paying very much, it felt like there wasn't that much pressure to do it. And I was from Southern California, so I had applied and listened to a couple different schools when they came calling. Arkansas, I remember, was one. Irvine was one. San Diego State was one. And I ended up going to San Diego State. It was part-time when I took the job, and by the time I drove down there, they made it full-time. So the expectations went up a little bit. But I was able to, again, at a very young age and very close to age to my players, be able to continue my playing career, stay informed, to try to be in the national team pool and just keep playing because I loved it. And I didn't have so many eyes on me that I felt like there was pressure to win. I just thought that I really wanted players to love the game like I did, to have the experience like I did, to want to come back to the school and partake in the program even after you graduated, and build an alumni group that was proud of where they went to school, and to make sure that the focus on academics and life skills and being able to leave college and feel empowered as a woman to step into any environment outside of sports, and know that because you were an athlete, you probably had a leg up on people because you'd been through something that very few people get to go through. And one thing led to another. And I fell in love with the team building aspect and building programs and finding a new way to evolve as a coach and a person. And it ended up becoming such a great part of my life.
So as you're at San Diego State, kind of just finding your way, how long are you there? And then what's the next step?
I was at San Diego State for 4 years. I'd only been there maybe for 1 or 2, and the programs all over the U.S. Started expanding. I remember the job at Stanford open, and as a Cal person, it was, do I want to apply at Stanford? But then the job at Washington opened, in that they started a brand new program, and I'd never lived outside of California and wasn't really looking to. But Washington was going to be a well-funded program compared to where I was at San Diego State. It was in the Pac-10, Pac-8, Pac-12, whatever you wanted to call it at the time. So I was used to being at a large public school with a large athletic department. So, and I'd been to Washington, I had played here, and in youth soccer and club soccer. So I thought, oh, maybe that is a place I can go. And I applied. And Amy was coaching at the University of New Mexico at the time, and she's from Washington. So we both were like, well, maybe they'll let us joint coach there. We could both go and do it together. It'd be really fun. And they kind of liked the idea, but they didn't really like the idea. She stayed at New Mexico for 4 years. I didn't get the job. A guy by the name of Dan Pibelvik, who was a youth coach, Colorado College. He'd been all around the youth game and one of the legends in our game. Got the job at Washington, but after 3 years, he left to go to Texas. He got wooed away to another big program that had added. And I was surprised when he left. He was only here for 3 years, and he put together a really, really good team. So 3 years later, I'd now been at San Diego State for 4 years. The athletic director at Washington remembered my interview from before and called me. And I was up against a couple of really legendary coaches. I know there was 2 or 3 of us that ended up as finalists. and I really changed my life. I felt really fortunate that whatever happened on my interview, I was offered the job, and I moved to Seattle in 1994 and have lived here ever since.
When you first got there at Washington, you said a program that was talented. How do you keep that rolling? And what were some of the things you tried to get in place at the beginning?
Yeah, in college soccer back in those days, we did have scholarships, which was a new thing for me because we barely had any funding at San Diego State at the time. And there were a lot of players that wanted to go play for their former coach. And I remember my athletic director, my associate athletic director at the time, Kit Green, she and I had some really, pretty pointed conversations about players that wanted to leave and go play for their former coach and transfer. And some of them were the most talented players on the team, starters, captains, had been on the team 3 years. And I could either say, you know what, no, you can't take a visit to Texas. You can't transfer. I'm not going to release you, because you had the power to do that in those days. That was a commitment, and a letter of intent was a letter of intent, and there was punishment for transferring. You had to sit out and blah, blah, blah. But I told her, I said, I want players that want to be here, and I want players that want to be a part of this with me. And I'm not gonna. I understand they were recruited by him. They may not have. I might not have been the one they wanted selected on the interview process, and I don't want this first part of my career here at Washington to be about contention or what I want. I want to be a good steward for the program, and if players want to be here, then I'll have to earn their trust and earn their respect. And I think the first way to do that is to let them go and look, and if they want to change, then that's the way it'll be. Do I think we'll be as good as if these 4 or 5 players decide to transfer? I don't, but I think we'll be okay. And she was very adamant that I shouldn't let them go and visit. And I said, I don't feel that way. I think if I go let them look, then the decision is theirs, and they won't feel like I kept them from something, and there won't be any regrets looking back. So I remember 4 of them specifically went and took a visit to Texas, and not one of them transferred. They stayed. And this was a program who was just on the verge of being a playoff program. And in my first season at Washington, we made the NC2A tournament, and they all stayed. And we went on to, I think we were on a streak of playoffs, maybe 14 out of my first 15 years. We were in the playoffs. We had 2 Elite 8 appearances in my 26 seasons. And we were really on the cusp a couple of years of getting to the College Cup. But wins and losses, were nothing compared to just the alumni network, the group of women over 26 years. And Amy came and joined me after 3 years. She, in her 4th year as the head coach at New Mexico, decided that she would come home to Washington, and 24 and 26 years later, the 2 of us had built something and been a part of something that we really look back on, and have made relationships and friends and former players whose lives we're involved in still to this day. Same with the players at San Diego State, just how much they contributed to my growth as a person and my learning. It will never be replaced. I mean, it was just really something special.
How important was the conversation with the athletic director? It seems like, I'm sure you've had some pretty tough conversations throughout your coaching career, and even having your friend come over. How important was it for the athletic director to at least give you the time to kind of communicate with? Because you don't always hear that kind of relationship between coach and athletic director.
Yeah, it was great. And the funny thing is that in my first season at Washington, I mean, she had been a senior associate athletic director. They used to call them senior women's administrator, SWAs back then. But Kit Green was really good at what she did. And I worked for a woman at Washington named Dr. Luella Lilly, and I worked for Barbara Hedges and for Kit Green. And Kit retired after a year. My first year at Washington, she retired, and her replacement was a woman named Marie Tuitt, who oddly enough was my senior women's administrator at Cal. So she had been at the NC2A for 5 to 6 years, took the job at Washington, and then she was my boss for 14 seasons. And so I just had this long line of network of female role models and athletic directors and women in positions of power, so to speak, that empowered me to be who I was. And they taught me, all of them. I mean, Dr. Lilly and Amy worked for a woman athletic director, and Linda Estes at New Mexico. And we always used to say that we have to do for others what they have done for us, which is be forthright, have the hard conversation, take the feedback, give the feedback, and I felt like I was always empowered to walk into a conversation with them and be really honest, and to ask for honesty in return. And sometimes it wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I was able to say, you know what, she knows what she's talking about, and we'll see how this goes, but I'm going to take the feedback and go back and try it this way, or I was told no because of X, Y, and Z on a budget thing, blah, blah, blah. But it really helped form who I was as a coach, because I felt like I could, for the most part, and I think it's always a learning curve with young coaches, especially when you're closer in age to your players, is to be able to have the honest conversation, the difficult conversations. There's never going to be a time where you can over communicate. There's never going to be a time where I think there's different ways you can deliver the truth to different people. And that was something that as a young coach, I had to learn. But truth and honesty and forthrightness hopefully became a cornerstone of who I was and who Amy was as a coach, and how we were as coaches. And I hope that that's what served us well. But I did learn that from a lot of the really great people that I was around, including my women administrators that I had during my time as a collegiate coach.
26 years is a solid length of time for coaching. You don't see it a ton as much now, especially as you mentioned about transfer portals and all the idea of commitment. What was it that kept you just locked in, the passion, the love of coaching at Washington, that let you go for over 2 decades?
The people, and the people that I got to, surround myself with, from the coaching staff to the support staff, and just the feeling that at the university I was valued as a member of the university, that it wasn't just about being a coach of a team. It was being a steward for the entire university and connecting to people on upper campus, whether it be the president or the dean of students or anyone else at a large university that would have an influence over my players. That, again, Amy and I, we felt like the women that we brought to our program, that we owed them and their families, a safe place to be themselves and to take care of them and be responsible in helping them learn and grow at a really vital time in their lives between 18 and 22, when you're first away from home, to be able to help them learn life skills that they could take far beyond the playing pitch, to show them that that anything was possible if you really work together as a group. I mean, it was just, every year was such a different challenge for us. And there was always this thread of what we could take something from the beginning to the end and make of it. And again, as things evolve, trying myself personally to evolve as a coach and doing things outside the University of Washington, whether it was coaching education or being part of a sports envoy and traveling the world, whether it was playing still, being a leader with the Olympic development program, or with U.S. Soccer, with United Soccer Coaches, being on the board. It was just finding things outside of my job at UW that I could bring back to UW that I felt benefited my players, benefited me as a coach, and made me better for them. So my involvement in the game at all different levels, I just feel like every little piece of that gave me something different to give to my players.
So 26 years, at what point does the decision become that, like, my time at Washington is up and I'm going to move on?
Yeah, I think that there's a natural breaking point. I think it's, and in 2019, I do think the last couple of years with the transfer portal, Amy and I know I felt this way, and I'm not going to speak for her, but it became difficult to feel, I think the bigger things got, the more different it was as far as your attachment and your ability to work directly with your athletes. The hour limitations, the rules, it just seems like it was becoming more and more restrictive. And again, I think support and learning to take the support that it grew into is not, be careful what you ask for, but when you all of a sudden have this staff of director of ops and a sports nutritionist and a sports psychologist and, 2 different strength coaches, and you're learning to manage a whole staff, and then your players start to have these other layer of adults in their lives that they also use as sounding boards and go-to people, which is outstanding to have that type of support in a program. And it's everything that we'd ever hoped for. But I would also say that the management of all of that takes you a little bit further away from your own connection with your athletes. And that started to be different for me. And I would say the transfer portal starting to become a thing, the rules changing. I just think that the restrictions and I think the management piece started to be more difficult. Social media was a big additive to that. I think that added a layer of something new that you had to get used to as a coach, what you were seeing, what they were seeing, how people were acting online, interacting online, uh, you know, how much you were criticized as a program, how much you were exalted, just the highs and lows of all the mental things that players have put upon their shoulders, and reading about themselves, whether they'd win or lose, or who did well, who didn't do well. And then all that becomes you're managing that for yourself, but then you're also managing it for 25 to 30 young women. It was different for sure. And so for me, in January of 2019, probably through some of my own decision and some of others' decisions, we probably collectively came to the point where this would be a good time to shift gears. So we had one last hurrah at UW in 2019, and we made it second round of the playoffs, and lost to a good South Florida team, and we're the Pac-12 coaching staff of the year, which is a cool way to go out. Beat the Cougs at home, which was a big thing for us, but it was bittersweet ending. I would say the silver lining in the cloud, because I watched a lot of my colleagues go through this, is that 2019 was my last season at UW, and then the pandemic hit in 2020. And I really honestly don't know that I could have navigated what a lot of coaches, a lot of my fellow colleagues were doing during that time. I think I was far enough down the road in my career that might have been the time where I would have, called timeout and said, you know what, this isn't for me anymore. I can't. It was a lot. And I really admire the people that navigated their way through that with players, with everything that was going on. And so that made it a little bit easier to start looking another direction. And then Amy and I, she was coaching our club, the academy in Seattle Reign at the time, and the development academy dropped. And so she and a bunch of other club coaches around the country started their own league when the development academy dropped. And 6 months later asked me to be the commissioner. And I said yes, and did that for 3 years. So yeah, one thing has led to another, and it's just all been, it's been an interesting journey I've been on. So it landed me here as the general manager, and I couldn't be more thrilled. I think about coaching. I miss it a little bit, but I'm really happy to be in the job I'm in, and really surrounded by a lot of great players, great people, great coaches that I get to work with day in and day out.
That was the thing that I was thinking about, is what that transition, it's transition from player to coach always takes a little bit of time to, like, oh, I can't coach him as a player anymore. I'm actually the coach. But then what's it like to go to a commissioner or a general manager where you've got your hands in a lot of, you talked about all the staff at Washington with all the other things that were going on supplemental wise, but now you're looking at the business side and marketing and everything. What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the commissioner job for 3 years as a startup, and doing everything online and trying to just get kids back on the field playing during a pandemic was absolute insanity. I mean, the group of board members that hired me that spent 60 to 80 hours a week just to get the league up and running was crazy. And I watched them do it, Amy being one of them. And I said, ooh, these guys are unbelievable, to try to get these girls back on the field and to give them a playing experience still. And so I watched that, and then I jumped in, and it was wild. It was 3 years of just running in quicksand, dealing with the youth soccer community is not for the faint of heart. But it was really rewarding work. And I think it was one that tested my leadership capability, to be honest. It pushed my growth as a person. I learned things from people. I feel like, in college coaching, I did go outside of my comfort zone a lot to be a coach educator, to work with US Soccer, to put myself in different realms that were outside of my normal coaching job at UW. But with that said, I was into a pretty good pattern and rhythm of what my life looked like as a collegiate coach, and I could pick and choose the other things that I would do. And then this for someone, again, who had a pretty long career to jump into the youth soccer space in a startup league was otherworldly for me. I probably learned more in those 3 years than I'd learned in the previous 26, all in kind of one intense period of time. And there were some great youth directors across the country that have been giving girls, Amy included, giving girls and young women a great soccer experience. And then there was a whole host of people who were, people like to call bad spiders, bad eggs out there that shouldn't be around youth players at all, that I spent a lot of time working with others to try to weed those out and to set standards and to make sure it was a safe space for girls to play in, and that they were looked after and taken care of, and that they had a voice themselves in their own playing pathway, and that we were empowering girls to understand at a young age how to spot things when they weren't right, to know what good coaching looks like, to know how they should be treated, and how their development looks from one age to the next, and how that prepares them not only to be the best they can as a player and achieve what they want to, but to make sure that they understand that the coach-player dynamic should look one way and not another, as far as what that feels like, as a young girl. So it was 3 years of that really prepped me for this job. I didn't know that this job as general manager in Seattle was going to come up, and not having to leave home and being able to be a part of the club that I've been a part of since the club was founded in 2012. Obviously, I've been a fan, a season ticket holder. I've worked with the former owners just to do color commentating, or when Laura was the coach the first time around, helping her as a collegiate coach try to look at players and scout, and be someone that she could lean on for that kind of advice when it came to the collegiate game. So it was really fortuitous that I was able to get this job. And now we're in a transition period with ownership, and the stakes in this league have just grown higher and higher. And I'm right in the thick. Today, a transfer window opens, an interleague transfer window. So, it's the off season, but the work never stops for the GM. And we're really working on building out our staff and resourcing our players better so that we can bounce back and get into another final sooner than later.
You mentioned at the beginning, single mom, 4 kids. What's it been like for her watching you when you were playing, to then getting into coaching, and just kind of watching you take a large leadership role in the world of soccer, especially on the female side?
Yeah, my mom was my role model, and she, as a single mom, worked really hard her whole life to make sure that we had better than she had. And when I quit law school, she and my stepfather, who were married for quite a long time, they were not necessarily happy when I quit law school and decided that coaching, which probably paid a lot less than I would have made as an attorney, that was the path I chose. But I'll say that my mom specifically was someone who was always proud of me. I mean, I always felt like whatever decision I made, whether I fell on my face or whether I succeeded, she was always in my corner and bragged about me to her coworkers. And that was another thing that I would say over the last several years is in the middle. She was a healthcare worker. She ran nursing homes. She was someone in Southern California who was lauded as being one of the best in her business as a 24-hour skilled nursing facility and rehab facility administrator. And anyone that knows anything about nursing homes or rehab facilities for the elderly, it is not an easy job, and it's not easy to be good at it. It's not easy to walk into a facility and know that someone in your family that has to be in one of these is going to be taken well care of. And my mom did that for over 60 years. And the pandemic here in Washington, there was a facility, one of the first facilities that had a COVID outbreak. And so COVID was kind of linked to, nursing homes being a place where it was going to run rampant. Well, my mom, made sure that never happened at the facilities that she ran. And she was already in her 80s by the time, COVID came around, and she still worked full time. And so that was difficult because I didn't get to see her a lot during that period when I changed jobs from UW. She wasn't able to come up here for my last season. And I was able to see her when I was the commissioner of the league a few different times. But in 2022, my mom fell ill suddenly and passed away within a week, and I was able to be with her. But that was 4 years of and it's still, it's coming up on the 3-year anniversary in February of her passing. And since then, I'm a different person. It's changed my life, grieving my mother. And I think that anyone that's experienced that kind of loss understands is that you change, and how you let yourself change is a process. And again, how I live my life and how I do my current job and how I show up and don't show up for others is something that I'm learning still. But a lot of who I am and who I strive to be is that pushing, not even pushing. My mom never really pushed me. She just supported me. And so the things that I do, I still have her in me telling me that it's something I can do and it's something I can achieve. And I'll forever be grateful that my mom always let me be me. There was never a time where she tried to make me something else or someone else or something other, which is a blessing, truly.
The other thing that popped up as you were talking about while at UW, you were doing ODP and you were coach educating and you were constantly trying to, you're always like doing a lot. Is there a time where Lesle is able to, you can even talk about now, we're in the off season, but there really is no off season. Is there opportunities to kind of turn the soccer brain off? Like even when you were coaching, were there opportunities, were you able to kind of get away from things? And if so, what do you do?
Yeah, I would say that like so much of my life was engulfed in it that I never like I don't feel in my college job, maybe until like the last few years that you started to feel that, okay, this is too much, the burnout. But there was always like a 4-year cycle of following a World Cup or traveling with our family to go watch a World Cup as fans, not as coaches. And that was awesome. But the cycle of the summertime and camp season, but able to kind of re-energize as a college coach was always there. I'm the commissioner job. That was a huge burnout job. I know I could not have gone past more than 3 years in that environment and felt like I was doing anybody a good service. The GM job with the club for sale has been a time for me. The death of my mom, all of it has been one where I've had to take stock in my personal life, my work life, how good I am for other people. And I'm not quite there yet, to be perfectly honest. I think this page turning in the transition of the sale and hiring more people and getting this club and helping getting this club to a point where I understand what the yearly rhythm and the yearly cycle looks like. And I think there's a lot of GMs that are out there that I can lean on, including our men's GM at the Sounders, Craig Weibel, who I know from his playing days at UW. He was a player when I was a coach there. I've leaned on him quite a bit to try to figure out what that looks like in your life and how you do look at the calendar of a season and build time off for yourself. Again, I have not become great at it yet. And because of the sale and the transition of the club, I haven't been in the best place to be able to take as much downtime as I would like, but I know I need to. Setting boundaries in the evening and on your regular daily schedule is one that you have to really get better at, as far as managing how much you're on the phone and on Zooms and on the computer. And so to answer your question, the short answer is TBD. Still working on it. I love what I do, so that matters. And if I can show up with enthusiasm and a growth mindset and want to learn and grow and be a part of something bigger than myself and a great contributor to the club and someone that helps it be better every day, then I will keep doing that. If I can't be good for myself, then I don't think I can be good for my job or whatever role I'm in at the time either. So I will always have in my head, like, okay, Lesle, we gotta get this right. You need to call a timeout and spend some time rejuvenating and a little bit more self-care than I have been probably over the last couple of years, for sure.
What's it like to you receive a lot of positive compliments online, awards from different associations, et cetera, et cetera. What does it mean to you when others recognize the time and the effort and the impact that you've made on the game of soccer?
It's humbling. I mean, you don't do anything. I don't do anything to those things. They matter and they're really nice. And again, just humbling when by any organization or from your peers that you're recognized for doing good work. To me, the biggest reward comes from thinking about all of the people that I've been surrounded by that have helped that recognition happen. I mean, it's never, you don't live on an island and do any of this by yourself. And again, it goes back to my coach, Bill Merrill, my coach, Brian Boswell, Clive Charles, Ziggy Schmidt, Jan Smizik, Amy Griffin, these people that I've had in my life for really long periods of time that have helped lift me up, my college teammates. A great group of women that I'm still really, really close friends with. I mean, the ladies of the 80s, we, if not for each other, we wouldn't be who we are. And my U.S. soccer coaching colleagues, from Dave Chesler to Heather Dyke to Mike Hawes to Carlos Juarez to Dean Wurzberger, who was the men's coach at UW and was a coach educator with me in U.S. soccer. I worked next door to him for 17 years, and he did nothing but lift me up. There was never a time where our relationship was contentious. We always were collaborative with one another. And so anytime, the United Soccer Coaches, formerly the NSCAA, my coaching colleagues there, and the people I served on the board with, women like Janet Rayfield and Marcia McDermott and Amanda Vandevoort, Haley Carter, Heather Dyke, these women who have done things similarly to me. Like, I think about them, like all of these honors or any honor that ever comes my way, the first thing I think about are the people that made it happen for me. And again, it's really cool to be recognized. It's humbling for sure. But without the people in my life, none of that happens.
Last question. This chat's been awesome, by the way. Is Seattle soccer? You've been there. You've been engrossed in it at the youth level to now at the professional level. What is the soccer scene there? What's the vibe? What's the energy environment? When people think about West Coast soccer, a lot of people know California and their history, but what is it about the Northwest that you love? You're talking about Denver, hopefully getting a team and all that. What is it about Seattle that you love so much?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to, and I was really, really fortunate in Southern California. And so I'm a little bit of a Southern California soccer snob still. I've lived half of my life in both places, half my life in California and half my life in Washington. And I think back to the 70s when I was first exposed to professional soccer, which was through the NASL and also Soccer Made in Germany on TV, but the NASL and the Los Angeles Aztecs. And I was really fortunate to be able to watch George Best and Johan Cruyff and Pele and Beckenbauer, like all these guys that came through the league, not only to watch them play, but to know them and meet them and become a part of that, and to watch UCLA men's soccer and Terry Fisher, who ended up managing the Aztecs, and then Ziggy coming through, and Todd Saldana, who was a high school soccer player at my high school, get drafted out of high school to go play for the Aztecs, and now he's the academy director for LAFC. I've just been around a lot of really cool people, but to answer your question, the NASL was also a huge thing in the Northwest, and Cascadia was a thing between the Whitecaps and the Sounders and the Timbers. And women's soccer has kind of spawned from that. And again, for people like Clive Charles to be able to run the women and men's program at the University of Portland, and really to show everybody that women's soccer was as cool as men's soccer, and for those types of things to evolve into what they are today. I mean, I think about Christine Sinclair and her retirement this year, and how proud Clive would be of his role, or just even his tiny part in helping make her who she is. And that had a lot to do with soccer in this area kind of sticking around from the 70s and becoming a big thing. So, being in this partnership now with the Sounders, with Seattle Reign, and looking at the whole enterprise as one big soccer family, and having the World Cup be coming here in 2026 for the men. The Club World Cup is here next summer. That it boasts well for when the World Cup does come back to the U.S. for the women, that we would be a host city. There's just so many people here that have been born and bred in the game of football, the game of soccer. You can't believe it until you live here, that there is a special feeling about it. And if you can succeed amongst all of the other professional American sports here in Seattle, alongside of them, then you've made it. And this town does really have an affinity for the sport. So it's just cool to be a part of. And I feel really connected to the people, the place, and the soccer family in the Northwest is really special.
That is a awesome way to shut this chat down. This is Kieran with Coach's Corner Chat with Lesle Gallimore, and I'm out.
Peace. All right. Thanks, Kieran. Thanks for having me.